Point Park Track and Field traveled to Kent State this past weekend ahead of their track conferences. Cheer and dance teams competed in the Siena Heights Spectacular. Point Park esports team had a close call on Saturday. Men's and women's basketball with a few games left before playoffs. The Penguins are back from the All-Star break and a milestone is on the horizon. And the NFL season has concluded as the Olympics continue on. It's time to come on down to the Pioneer Sideline. Hello and welcome to Pioneer Sideline. I'm Natalia Hillen. This past weekend, the men and women's track and field teams competed in two meets. On Friday and Saturday, a handful of athletes traveled to the Kent State National Qualifier, and a majority of athletes competed in the Baldwin-Wallace mid-February meet on Friday. Starting with the Kent State meet, freshman Steve Bradley broke the school record in the 400-meter dash with a time of 50:12, placing 13th. Another school record came from the 4x4 meter relay team with Juan Barrera, Isaiah White, Steve Bradley, and Damir Lomax with a time of 3:23. The final school record of the meet was also made by Damir Lomax, placing 12th in the 60-meter hurdles with an 8.70. Leading Point Park in the 60-meter dash and 200-meter dash was Damir Steven Stewart, placing 9th in the 60 with a time of 7:04, and in the 200 placing 4th with a 22:18. The Pioneers also had athletes competing in the 800-meter dash. Placing 19th was Doug Konstalansky at 2.30 and Ramiro Ulunke at a time of 2.33. In the triple jump, sophomore Collins Ezzi placed 7th at 14.0 meters. Moving on to the women's team at Kent, two more athletes qualified for the NAIA National Championships. Junior Sophie Jabozi led the way in the triple jump with a personal best of 11.36. Another qualifier was senior Alyssa Campbell in the mile with a time of 5:12. Leading the way in the 200 and 400-meter dash was freshman Emma Pavlik with a time of 27:41 in the 200, and in the 400 a time of 1:03. Switching gears over to the Baldwin-Wallace meet, on the men's side in the shot put was sophomore Cooper Lytle, placing 3rd with a throw of 12.99. And shortly behind him was placing 4th was Nasir Galloway with a 12.98 meters. In the weight throw, Daniel Jacobs was at 12.38 meters, placing 10th, breaking his own school record. Moving on to the sprints, sophomore Dorian Boatswain led in the 55-meter dash, placing 7th, and in the 200-meter dash, Darnell Clem with a time of 23:94, placing 6th overall. Moving on to the women's side, in the high jump, freshman Jaden Hines won the event, placing 1st with a 1.59 meters, and placing 2nd overall in the 55-meter hurdles was senior Nia Goodman with a time of 9.06. The Pioneers' next meet is the RSC Indoor Championships on Saturday, February 19th. Good luck to both teams as they prepare this week. Switching gears, Point Park's competitive cheer and dance teams competed in the Concordia University Invite this past weekend. Starting off cheer, the Pioneers placed 3rd out of 4 teams with a total score of 61-63. The dance team competed twice on Sunday, and in the first competition, they placed 3rd out of 6 teams with a score of 69-75. And in the second competition, they placed 2nd out of 3 teams with a score of 72-05. The cheer and dance team's next competition will be virtual on Wednesday, February 16th versus University of St. Francis. Also, both teams will be competing in their own competitions on Saturday. The cheer team will be heading to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for cheer nationals, and the dance team will be traveling to the NAIA Mid-East Regionals in Miami Gardens, Florida. Good luck to both teams this week. After the break, we'll hear from John Mayer on how men's and women's basketball played this past week in the esports team first Valorant game of the season.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, and welcome back to Newsnight. Most of the student body of the Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Some of the United States allies.
Thursday, the FBI was seen raiding.
Let's get started with today's forecast.
Today's high will only reach about 31 degrees.
It's looking a little cooler than we've seen in the past few weeks.
All this and more
All this and more
All this and more coming up on Newsnight.
coming up on Newsnight.
coming up on Newsnight.
The Point Park esports team had their first Valorant match this weekend, and both the men's and women's basketball teams had 2 games. To update us on those, we send it over to John Mayer. John?
Thanks, Nat. The Point Park esports Valorant team came up with a huge win over Old Dominion in their first series of the year by a 2-1 margin, notching their first win of the year. They play every Friday, and League of Legends will continue this coming Saturday. Make sure to check out their Twitch for all of their games. Now on to basketball. Point Park women's basketball dropped their first game to West Virginia Tech last Tuesday, 96-66. Michelle Burns led the team with 22 points. The team shot 26 for 71 from the field and 6 for 27 from 3. The girls play again on Saturday against Rio Grande, and luckily this game was a lot closer. Michelle Burns and Taylor Wren both had 29 points, with Wren also grabbing 14 rebounds. The girls were down 71-62 entering the fourth and battled back to keep it close, losing 99-91. The girls play again Thursday at Carlo at 6 p.m. As for the men's team, Nate Van put up 32 points against West Virginia Tech on Tuesday, but fell short 100-70 after a slow first half. Mahali Stefanos had 12 points off the bench. Point Park shot for 57% in the second half, connecting 15 of their 26 shots. The boys played Rio Grande on Saturday and kept it close by cutting a 19-point deficit down to just 2 points in the final minutes. Jordan Stowe led the team with 22 points and 11 rebounds. The boys' next game is against Bryan and Scranton, Buffalo, on Saturday at 2 p.m. That's all from me. Back to Nat at the desk.
Thanks, John. Up next, we hear from Jacob Kubik about the Penguins' road trip over the past week. The Pittsburgh Penguins continued their winning ways this past week on their 3-game road trip. To update us on how they did and all things Pittsburgh sports, we bring in Jacob Kubik. Jacob?
Thanks, Nat. The home away from home for the Pittsburgh Penguins doesn't seem like it is just one city anymore. Dating back to January 15th, the Penguins have won 6 games in a row away from Pittsburgh. 3 of those 6 road wins were within the last 7 days. Last Tuesday, the Pens traveled to Boston to battle the Bruins in their first game back from the All-Star break. After getting dominated in the first period, Danton Heinen scored back-to-back goals in 28 seconds to tie the game at 2-2. The Penguins scored 4 unanswered goals in total to take the win by a final score of 4-2. 2 nights later, in Canada's capital city of Ottawa, Penguins shooters bombarded ex-Penguins goalie Matt Murray with 43 shots. Penguins goalie Casey DeSmith also stood tall in his crease, making 26 saves in the Penguins' shutout win of 2-0. Sunday afternoon before the big game in Los Angeles, the Penguins battled the New Jersey Devils in Newark. After exchanging goals all game, Brian Boyle put the Penguins up to a 3-2 lead, and a late empty net tally by Jake Gensel sealed the Penguins' 4-2 win and perfect 3-game road trip. Penguins captain Sidney Crosby scored in Boston to boost his goal total to 499 for his career, one away from the milestone number. The Penguins' next game is at home tonight against a cross-state division rival, Philadelphia Flyers, a team Crosby has performed well against throughout his career. Is goal 500 waiting for Sid tonight? Only time will tell. Back to you now.
Thanks, Jacob. Now let's send it over to Colton Tobias on who is going to recap us on the big game and give us some insight on the Olympics. Colton?
Thanks, Nat. The big game has come and gone as the Los Angeles Rams are the world champions. Game MVP Cooper Kupp had an outstanding game with 92 yards and 2 touchdowns. One of which was the game winner against the Bengals and their cornerback Eli Apple. While Matthew Stafford had 2 interceptions, he threw for 283 yards and completed 26 of his 40 passes. On the other side of the ball for the Rams, for what might have been his last game, Penn Hills native and Pitt alum Aaron Donald went out in style. Donald had 3 solo tackles with 2 sacks, one of which sealed the victory in the closing seconds of the game. Von Miller also had 2 sacks and is the only player in NFL history to record multiple sacks in the big game for 2 different teams back when he was with the Broncos. While the Bengals did not get the job done, what a performance by this Cincinnati team. Joe Burrow was 22 for 33 with 263 yards and a touchdown. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase combined for 189 yards, with Higgins getting only 2 touchdowns for the team. The Bengals defense offered a lot of pressure in the first half with a Trey Henderson sack, but wasn't enough to outmatch the Rams. And like Joey mentioned last week, Aaron Donald, Von Miller, and both quarterbacks shined in the big game and deserved high praise for their performances. Now on to the Olympics. The United States is currently sitting in 3rd place with 17 total medals, trailing behind Germany, who has 18, and Norway with 26. One of the biggest stories for the United States is Shaun White officially calling it a career. In the men's halfpipe, Shaun was one of 3 Americans in the finals. In the first of 2 runs, Shaun slipped and scored a 24.25. But luckily, in his second run, he qualified for the finals with a score of 86.25, placing him 4th in the finals. In Shaun White's final Olympic run, he scored a 72, putting him in 4th, then an 85 in the second run, keeping him in 4th with his 3rd and final run, hopping for a top 3 score. Shaun crashed, finishing his final Olympic run in 4th place. What a career for one of the best U.S. Olympic athletes of our generation. That's all I have. Let's send it back to Nat.
Thanks, Colton. Coming up next, we talk about mid-season hockey reports, who's surprising us so far, and who is going downhill. We'll be right back.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, and welcome back to Newsnight. Most of the student body of the Pittsburgh Public School.
Some of the United States allies.
Thursday, the FBI was seen raiding.
Let's get started with today's forecast.
Today's high will only reach about 31 degrees.
It's looking a little cooler than we've seen in the past few weeks.
All this and more
All this and more
All this and more coming up on Newsnight.
coming up on Newsnight.
Coming up on Newsnight.
Welcome back. This week we're talking about the mid-season hockey reports. I'm joined with Jacob, Colton, and John, and we're going to talk about who's surprised everyone so far and who's heading downhill. So Jacob, what surprises did you have?
For me, the biggest surprise is kind of under the radar. I think the Calgary Flames being in second place in the Pacific Division right now is a major accomplishment. Right now, they're at about 8 games less played and at 3 points better than their total last season through the 56-game season. So I think Jacob Markstrom has been playing like out of his mind so far for the team. And to sit only 1 place out of first place in a really stacked Pacific Division is a big surprise in my book.
That's definitely a surprise. Colton, how about you?
This isn't really a surprise to me, Natalita, but I'm surprised that they made it this far. I'm going with the Florida Panthers. Now, they lost in the playoffs last year to the now 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, I thought Florida was going to come back strong, but not to the point where they are currently leading the Atlantic Division, only 1 point behind the defending Stanley Cup champions. And I expect Florida to go far this year, and I think possibly even make it farther than Tampa.
Wow. John?
One team that has overachieved that I did not expect to play as well as they have is the New York Rangers. They had the talent, they've had the draft picks. It's been a youth movement in New York. It's been kind of a new era since the legendary Henrik Lundqvist retired a couple years ago, who just had his jersey raised to the rafters, by the way. But this Rangers team, they added some physicality. I really feel like that Ryan Reeves acquisition has given this Rangers team some physicality, that physicality they were missing last year when we saw against the Capitals, that whole melee with Tom Wilson. I really thought bringing in Ryan Reeves was huge for this team. Chris Kreider leads the NHL in goals. I really think the Rangers are on the upswing.
All right, the next question, what about the downhill teams?
Personally, I can't really pinpoint one. I'm going to pinpoint the bottom 4 teams in the Metropolitan Division. Right now, the top 4 are the Penguins, the Hurricanes, the Rangers, and the Capitals. And if the bottom 4 teams, there's a 14-point difference between 4th and 5th place. And one of those teams was the New York Islanders, who made a deep run last year. So I think for those teams to be underperforming may not be as big a surprise, but to the level that they're underperforming is a major surprise to me.
Colton?
Well, mine's the defending Western Conference champions and the Stanley Cup final runner-ups. 23 points, the Montreal Canadiens. It's just, who would have thought that they would have gotten downhill like that after they made it so far to the final, when I think a lot of people really didn't expect them to.
For my disappointment, I'm going to stay in my home state of New York for this one. I'm going to go with the Islanders. You mentioned them before. They were on the cusp of the Stanley Cup, making it there. And to see them not even really in contention for a playoff spot is just crazy to me. I really thought they were going to be a team to take that next step, possibly win the Cup this year, but it just hasn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
Anything else, guys?
Well, coming back to John's point, I just think at the end of the day, the Metropolitan has just been so stacked this year. You have the Hurricanes, who are strong, the Penguins, which are strong as well, and I really didn't even expect the Rangers to even get that far. It's just, there's just so much, and also you cannot forget about the Capitals either with Alex Ovechkin, which I just think that the Metropolitan has just been so stacked this year. I think it's just so hard to compete.
Well, and if you look at the Penguins, nobody ever thought that they would be as high up right now as they were, because we have one of the highest main games lost in the whole league. So for us to be in first place in itself for a stretch without Crosby and without Malkin for a good period of time is really an achievement.
Yeah, we had so many, all the Penguins games. We had so many that we won in a row, and that was so impressive to see them, even with players that weren't able to even play in the games. But we'll have to see how the rest of the season goes.
Yep.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Be sure to join us next week at the same Pioneer time, the same Pioneer channel, and the same Pioneer Sideline.